everyone, it's Daphne from Scrap and Create. I'm back to work on a new album, and this album is going to be a little bit different than the previous one. It's going to be a little bit bigger. It's going to be 8.5 by 10, and it's going to be featuring the Graphic 45 Christmas Magic collection. So if you buy the bundle from us, you'll get these coordinating ribbons, some coordinating charms, the 8 by 8 pad, patterns and solids, and then the 12 by 12 pad. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I've done some pre-cutting like I've done in previous videos. So I'll start by laying out my actual album cover. And so as I mentioned before, it's 8.5 by 10. 8.5 by 10 is the actual size of the pocket page. So the cover needs to be a little bit bigger. I always wanted a 1/4 inch larger height than the actual pocket page, and then a 1/2 inch wider than the pocket page, so that when I put my inserts in, they're still protected. So that leaves me with these measurements, 9 by 10.25. So you need 2 of those, and then the spine will be 2.5 by 10.25. And that's my standard because I'm going to do. Okay, we're going to start by building our pocket page. So when we're finished, our pocket page is going to be 8.5 by 10. So we're going to start with an 8.5 by 10.5 inch piece of paper. We're going to need 2 of those, and then we're going to put these together to build our pocket page. Okay, so it is 8.5 by 10.5. We're going to score 1/2 inch along the 10.5 inch side, making this a 10 inches once it's finished. Okay. Sit down and go ahead and put this together. If you have not previously watched any of my tutorials, I encourage you to do so. Probably my best base tutorial is the 8 by 8, and I go over in great detail how to construct the album from the very basics, and talk about some tips in terms of how to get the best quality out of your efforts. So I encourage you to watch that if you haven't seen it already. I'm going to kind of breeze through a couple of those things to try to get this video out sooner rather than later. Christmas is right around the corner. I know some folks are anxious to see the Christmas paper and get some inspiration out there for your holiday projects. Okay. So right now, all I'm doing is making sure that corner is as tight as possible. I'm pretty happy with that, so I'm going to push that down firmly. I'm going to flip my paper over, and I am going to do the same thing on the opposite corner, which is this one, so diagonally across. I'm going to try to line this up, get it as neat as I can, and then I'll come back and pull all the tape out. That's pretty sharp. Looks pretty sharp. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm going to use the palm of my hand to come across the paper and pinch that corner down. And one of the reasons I do that is to try to prohibit the page from bowing. So I want it, when I'm finished, to be nice and tight so that the inserts that I put in later don't want to slide in and out too freely. Okay, I'm pretty happy with this. So I'm going to go back and pull out and press down. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Pull out and press down. Okay, and there is our pocket page. Oops, I only got part of my tape out. So I'll go back and finish that. You're going to need a total of 4 of these for this mini album. It's actually more of a mid-size album, not a mini album. At 8.5 by 10, it's a pretty good size. It's starting to get back to or close to scrapbooking size, 12 by 12. Okay, that is all done. So like I said, this is 8.5 by 10.5. You're gonna score along, if you put this into your scoreboard at 10.5, you're gonna score it 1/2 inch on that side. And we're going to use a total of 4. So I didn't construct these all online, but here are the balance of mine. I'm going to set these aside, and we're going to move forward with the... Okay, now we're going to work on the hinge. And for the hinge, you're going to need to start with a piece of paper that is 9 7/8 by 8.5. 9 9/7 by 8.5. And we're actually going to go ahead and score this, and we're going to start at the 1 1/2 tick mark is going to be our first score line. So that is 1 1/2. Then we're going to go to 2. So we'll do 1 1/2, then 2, 2 1/2, 3, 3 1/2, 4, 4 1/2, 5, 5 1/2, 6, 6 1/2, and 7 is going to be where we finish. So again, we're going to start at 1 1/2, and we're going to score every 1/2 inch till 7. So go ahead and get started with that, and I'll get started with mine, and I'll get these score lines in, and then we're going to do the accordion folds and add our tape, 2 and then 2 1/2. 3, 3 1/2, oops, 4, 4 1/2. I'm using a new scoreboard. I'm not sure I'm happy about it. It feels a little upside down to me. Might have to go back to my Martha Stewart. 6, 6 1/2, and then 7. All right. The only thing I like about it is that it basically folds up to nothing. Okay, so again, we've started at 1 1/2. We scored every 1/2 inch to 7, and we are going to go ahead and start doing our accordion folds. And remember, between each one of the hinges is a 1/2 inch gusset, so you'll skip that, and then we'll go to the next one. And then I like to pinch it together, and then the gussets kind of come together on their own. Okay, I'm gonna do that one more time. Actually, a couple more times. And then when we're done, we should have 4 hinges. There we go. So we'll have 4 hinges, equal distance, and then we have these 3 gussets. And then we should have the same amount of leftover flap on each side. And again, these become the anchors that get adhered directly to the front and the back of the album to help the spine stay in place, or to help the hinge stay in place. So I have gone ahead and pre-prepared another one, so we don't have to go through and watch me put all the tape in. But if you've come this far, if you flip it over, you'll see you've got these valleys. In each of these valleys, you're going to want to put some tape and pinch it closed so that when you're finished, you get this. So it's going to go from this to this. This is where I've put tape between each one of those valleys and pressed it together. So it's ready for tape to be applied to this so that it can actually go in the album. So with that, I'm going to set these pieces aside, and then that gets us to the cover. We're ready to start preparing the actual album cover. So we're going to need a 10 1/4 by 9. You're going to need 2 of those, 9 by 10 1/4, 2, and then a 2 1/2 by 10 1/4 for your spine. And then these are actually, I'm actually going to use 2 sheets of 12 by 12 to cover the album. So I'm going to step away for a moment and I'm going to go get those. Okay, so here are my 12 by 12 sheets, and real quick I'm going to go over, so when you have your sheets, it's good to flip it around a little bit to try to figure out what is the natural grain of your 12 by 12 sheet. And the reason you want to do that is you want your spine to run perpendicular to the grain. It goes a long way to preventing cracking in your album. And the way that you figure that out is you can feel the amount of bounce in the paper. And if it wants to fold over on itself more in one direction than the other, that's the grain. So this is the grain of this paper. So I want to make sure, as I'm preparing to cover my album, that my grain is going the same direction as my spine. So, okay, so that is this direction. So I'm going to set aside my chipboard, and I know from just handling the paper that the grain is going in this direction. So I'm going to put some tape here. I'm going to join these two pieces because you need two 12 by 12s to actually cover this album. And I want to pay attention to what I'm doing so that I don't inadvertently rotate one of these pieces and then change the direction. Now, it's not to say that if you don't go with the grain that it will crack. I'm just saying that the chances of it cracking are really minimized if you can work with the grain of the paper. And that's not just true for the cover and the hinge of the cover. That's true for any hinges that you do inside your album as well. So it's I don't pay as much attention to the hinges inside, but it does help, and it will prevent cracking over time. But what I find is if you try to do everything with a grain of the paper, you do have to waste some of the cardstock. And that's a really hard thing for me to do. So it matters it matters more on pages that are moving around a lot. So the hinge on the pocket page itself, since you fold it over and then you glue it to make a pocket page and it doesn't move anymore after that, not so important. But on flaps that open and close or envelopes, anything like that, that's where you really want to pay attention to your grain. Okay, enough of that. So I've got my tape down. I'm going to overlap these pages. I do want to make it kind of tight since this is a 10 by 10 plus 2.5. That's going to make it 22.5 inches of paper that I need to actually cover my album. So I don't want to have too much leftover paper or too much overlap and then have it not be able to reach around both ends of the album. So it's going to lay out like this. And as you can see, hopefully, and I'll slide it back and forth a little bit, there's not going to be a lot of room for trimming. We're going to lay down the spine, and as I've shown you in previous videos, I like to lay down the spine, get it where I'm happy with it, and then block my cover and the back of my album actually off of the spine. So I'm going to get some tape on this, get this down, and then we'll come back and get the front and back covers put in. So it looks like it's going to be pretty tight. So this is 10 1/4, and the paper is 12.5. Okay, I'm back. Sorry about that. I had to take a phone call. So I'm back, and we were working on the cover. We've got our two 9 by 10 1/4, and then our 2.5 by 10 1/4. While I was away, I went ahead and got my adhesives on the back of these pieces. And then I also located where the seam is, where the overlap is, and then I figured out roughly where I want to place my spine, just by making sure, laying it down and making sure that the overlap in the two pages is not in one of the seams of the album. So it's going to be running across the back. So I went ahead and put myself a little cheat line here. I'm not going to measure it. I'm going to eyeball it, but it's just under 1 inch on each side. And I'm going to go ahead and lay this down, and then this is going to be, the spine is what we're going to use as the guide to lay the other pieces of the chipboard down. Okay? I'm going to sit down, because it looks like for the most part I'm in the frame. And I go over all of these construction techniques in pretty fair detail in the 8x8 mini album if you guys want to check that out at some point. I'm going to stand up so I can look down over my 12x12 and get this piece centered up and down as best I can before I lay it down. It's a lot of adhesive I've got on the back, so once I press this down, it's pretty much game over. So I need to be fairly confident with my placement. Okay, there we go. It is in. I'm going to turn it over and burnish this a little bit. And then I'm going to pull out a tool that I've created for myself. It's a little jig that I've created to use when I'm building my mini albums. And what I did was I took a piece of chipboard and then I added two more pieces to it and heated it. And this becomes, it's 3 layers deep now. This becomes what I want to use as the spacer before I lay down my next sheet. So I will butt this up against the spine piece, pull this in, and make it as snug as possible. Take that out, and that's how I come up with my spacing. And that's worked really well for me. I've tried different depths, and this seems to be what I'm most comfortable with. It's holding up the best. It doesn't seem to crack or bind too much or pinch. So I'm pretty happy with this. It's something you would make on your own, and you want to make sure that you're using the same chipboard for your jig that you're actually making your book with. Otherwise, the thickness will vary. All right, so I have a pretty good idea what I want to do. I'm going to take off my tape and then set my jig in here and place my covers. And then for the purpose of the covers and this step, I'm going to actually add a little glue between my adhesive because I want to make sure that none of the paper on my cover or the back bubble at all. So I want to make sure it's nice and firmly adhered to the base cardstock. So I'm going to use my art glitter glue. This is for sale in our shop. You can get it in the 2 or 4 ounce bottle. I'm using a 4 ounce bottle. We also sell the tips, which I'm a huge fan of because I was always losing my pen. This is pretty hard to lose. Okay, so I'm going to add my glue in between. And then I'm also going to add some glue on the first edge that I'm going to put down so that I have a minute or so to change my mind or lift it back up. And this will be my leading edge, so I'm going to go ahead and put some glue here. And that will give me a chance to sort of slide it into place. So I'm going to place my jig here. I'm going to stand up because I want to see the top and bottom. And I'm pushing the cover toward the spine piece, which is already firmly placed. And then I'm going across the bottom to make sure I've got a straight line. That looks good. I'm going to put that down, pop out my spacer. I'm going to slide everything over, and we're going to do it one more time for the back. Okay. And again, I'm going to do the same thing with the back. I'm going to add some glue that gives me a little bit of time on placement, keeps the tape from grabbing the minute I get close to the cover, and gives me just the wiggle room I need to push firmly against my jig and slide up and down until I get it just right. Okay, I'm gonna go with my glue. This will be my leading edge, so I'm gonna put some glue on this side. And then I'm gonna get some glue. Jig. It's my leading edge, so I'm going to flip it, and that's the side I'm going to put down first. And I'm standing because I want to be over the album so I can see, so I can really see the top and bottom, and that it's a straight line. And so it's not, so right now I am just nudging that, and that's why that glue comes in handy, is it allows me to do that little bit of nudging. So we're in. Okay, and as you can see with the two 12 by 12 pieces of paper, I don't have a whole lot of excess around the edges, so in the case of this album we won't have to do any trimming before we actually finish the wrap. Okay, all right, so that is looking pretty good. So I'm going to work the hinge and spine right here a little bit, and then we're going to come back around and get my glue covered up so it doesn't clog, and we are going to add tape around the edges so that we can wrap the edges. So I'll go ahead and do that right now. Okay, I like to put a line of tape, double-sided tape, on the chipboard, and I mislaid my, here it is. So all the way around the chipboard, and then I also, on the outside edge of the black paper, like a line of adhesive. So the covers get quite a bit of action, so don't skimp on your adhesive here. And I'm using 3/8 inch score tape, which is my kind of go-to. More pieces and we're almost done. And then we'll start folding up the edges to finish up the wrap, and we're going to start on the length, and I'll talk to you a little bit about why that is when we get to the next step. Okay, so that's done. Now, before I add my tape around the black edges, I'm going to miter my corners so that I don't have to waste any tape. Okay. Okay, and I just use my my jig again. I try to get a nice consistent angle, but most of this is going to get covered up, so I don't stress too much about it. I'm going to use my white jelly pen so that you guys can see the marks I'm making once I get done. Okay. There we go. This is pretty straightforward. Now this is probably, everybody's got their own technique for mitered corners. This is wider than it needs to be. So when I come back and do these corners, I'll have a little bit left over to tuck. And I've just burned myself so many times by not giving myself enough to cover the corner completely, so that when I started to miter my corner, I had some of the chipboard exposed. That I'm really gun shy, so I tend to err on the side of too much paper, but everybody's different. If you like to do a tighter corner, by all means do, but like I said, I've burned myself so many times, I just don't even bother. So someday I'll find the perfect miter tool. And it's simple enough to come back and trim more when you're actually ready to lay the edges down. But you can't put more on. So what happens is, if I get too tight, and I do have some of my corners exposed, what I do to cover it up is I actually use a black marker. And I would do that maybe for my own album, but I certainly wouldn't want to gift that to somebody, so. Okay, now we're curling up the sides here. You just want to work that a little bit. So remember, when we put this all together, we decided the grain of the paper was going this direction, which is the same direction as the spine, which means it's not really going to want to bend this way. So you do have to work it a little to get it to behave. And we're going to do that, and then we'll come back and add the tape. These ends will come up very nicely because they are, again, going with the grain. Okay, so that's a pretty good start. So I'm going to go ahead and lay down my 3/8 inch tape. And for this, it's going to be as close to the edge of the black paper as possible. So essentially, when you fold it over, you've got adhesive going the whole length. And this is longer than it needs to be, but that's okay. I'm just going to leave it and add my tape to the top. It will get covered. I do album liners, so it will get covered. So it's okay if it's not equal distance to the sides. Moving right along. Okay, we got all our tape in. We're gonna go around burnish. And the burnish does a couple of things. One, it really presses the tape down on the cardstock, which makes removing the backing a lot easier, but it also prohibits the tape from coming up with the backing as you're going around, which if it's not down very good, sometimes you can pull your tape back up. So it does a little bit of both. Okay. And I think I did these already, but it does not hurt to do it again. And you know, if you're fighting to get your tape, the backing off your tape, chances are you're not burnishing enough. There we go. So I'm gonna start this direction. Again, I'm just working these edges so they'll lay down nice and neat when I'm ready. And I think I'm ready. So now for this step, what we want to do is we want to start in the center and work our way to the edges. If there happens to be any binding, keep running into my coffee cup, at all, we want it to be pushed out toward the edges, not toward the spine and in here. So we're going to start here and push that down firmly. And then we're going to go side to side, pushing up firmly. Okay, that looks beautiful. I'm going to burnish that. I'm going to flip it, and we're going to do the same thing on this side. My pick tool. Let's get our backings off. Okay, again, we're going to start in the center here. We're starting in the center. We're going to push our way out. And make sure we get a good, firm placement. There we go. And there's no bubbles, and that's nice. We're going to work these seams a little. And then we are going to fold it. Okay, and we want to kind of work that around a little, making sure everything looks good before we start to fold these over, because once we fold these over, there's no more room. The paper can't wiggle. So I like to work the hinges a little. Make sure everything is looking good. No issues. And it does. So now it's time to come back and do the edges. And this is where, if you look closely, there's a little left over here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna push this down and make that very sharp before I roll it over, and then you'll see there's a little tip here. So there's a couple things you can do. One, you can just glue it down like this and have that flap, or you can come back with your scissors and cut that at an angle so that you have a perfectly mitered corner, which is what I usually do. So here, I'm just using my tools to make sure that it's completely flat. Now if I come back with my scissors, I can cut from here to here, and it'll be a perfectly mitered corner. So I just trimmed that little tiny bit, and now you see it's perfectly mitered. And that's the way I do my perfectly mitered corners, because I can't figure out how to do it ahead of time. I do it actually real time when, once I folded it over and see exactly where I need to be, that's how I figure it out. So everybody does it a little different. This is how I get my corners to be perfect. Okay. I'm happy with that, so I am ready to pull off my adhesive and make this permanent. Okay, now because I have quite a bit here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put some glue there. Good enough. Start from the center and then push out. scrape up any extra glue. Looks lovely. Very happy with that. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing on this side. I want to push this paper down and make a crisp fold right on the other side. And I'm just pressing this so that it's nice and firm before I fold this over. And then I'm going to use my bone folder there we go. Okay, now I can see where I need to trim this, so I'm going to do that very quickly. Same on this side. I'm going to take my tape and remove my tape and add a little glue, and then we're done. And then I think the next step, what are we doing next? Oh, the hinge goes in. Yeah. And that didn't come all the way out, so I'm going to dig that little piece out. Okay, there it is. I'm going to add my glue. Maybe. Got my cap on so tight, it didn't want to let go. My cap is not working right, so I am going to set this aside, and then I'll use tape instead, so I don't have to fuss with that, although it's all over me now. So just like with any glue cap, it gets clogged once in a while just because I forget to get the cap on there right away, and so it starts to dry. So I just need to rinse it. And I just take the whole mechanism off, put it in a bowl of water, and then that's pretty much all you got to do. It'll take care of itself after that. Okay, so here we go. Start from the center and move out. Down, looks good. All right, so here we are. We have our cover, and as you can see, it's a pretty large album. So I hate to say mini album, it's more like a mid-size album. Now earlier we had put together our hinge system, so it's ready to go. I just need to add the tape to the back, so I'm going to do that real quick, and then we're going to get this put into the book. And the next step will be adding our pages, and then we'll start doing the fun stuff, getting some of the flaps and decorated pages in. And here, I think I'm probably working off camera, but here the spine is carrying a lot of weight, and it's essentially what's holding your book together. So don't skimp on your adhesive here. Use plenty of your score tape, and remember that score tape over time remains flexible and glue does not. So I really recommend, even if you use some glue to help you with placement, you know, you really pretty much need score tape on the back of your hinge system to keep it in place in your album. So, like I said, I try to cover every piece of exposed paper before I put it down. Okay, so one more thing on this is we still need to add score tape to either side of the hinges, which is, we're going to slip the pockets over that. So while it's out of the book and easier for me to handle, I'm going to go ahead and do that. So in both cases, on both sides of each hinge, we're adding our score tape, and I'm placing the score tape as close to the top, the peak of the hinge as possible, so that there's a little bit of space between the hinge and the gusset so that I can move my page around without exposing any of the tape. So all the tape is going to be placed as close to the top of the hinge as possible. And then that leaves me just a little bit of wiggle room to move my pages up and down and make sure that when they're in the book, they're all laying even and square to each other. And that'll be a little more obvious when I get to that step. Okay, we're going to do this for each one of the hinges. Okay. All right. This was kind of an interesting album to put together. It's so large. Each page is so large, you can actually have... All right, sorry about that. It was a brief interruption. I'm actually using my phone to record this, so whenever I get a call, it interrupts, stops recording. And I need to actually get in the practice of putting my do not disturb on so that doesn't happen, but kind of hard to do when you have a 15-year-old roaming or 16-year-old roaming around. You need to be able to stay in touch. All right, so this is the last piece of tape that I'm applying. Then I'm going to burnish everything and get this into the book. Burnish, also very much easier to do outside the album. So by adhering the tape and getting your hinges covered before you apply it to the book, it's much easier to work with. So it's all ready now. So I need to remove my adhesive, and I'm looking to center this up and down and left to right. So I'm going to do this visually, and then sometimes I will put a little pencil mark, but honestly, I'm going to use my grid. So what I'm doing right now is I'm trying to place the two hinge pieces here and here between on my grid so that they're evenly spaced. So then I can use my grid visually as a checkpoint. So this looks like about the center. Looks pretty good, yeah. All right, and so this is going to get laid down like this, and I don't have a lot of extra space on either side. And it should just be looking to have balance, you know, so there's not too much space on the top or bottom. So just give me a second and I'll get all my adhesive uncovered. And then this is where, if you want to use some glue, it's not a bad idea, and that's just to keep the hinge from, to give you a little bit of room to wiggle around the hinge before you make a commitment. I'm just going to go ahead and lay it down. I've done it so many times, I feel pretty confident. But if you don't, this is where you'd use a little glue, and you can actually be pretty generous with it since none of this is going to be exposed. And then the glue will allow you to slide up and down. Not for very long, but for a little bit of time. All right, I'm leaning forward and back. That looks pretty good. You know what? I'm going to turn it side to side so I can, the distance between here and here is easier than looking over for me visually. Okay, that's it. Okay, we're going to burnish this. And then we're going to go between each hinge and burnish. And then we're going to work the actual seams here. Make sure that adhesive goes all the way in between. Okay. All right, that looks pretty good. I'm going to do that same thing on this side. Okay, that looks pretty good. Pretty centered. But if I had to say, it's probably leaning more this way. But it's okay. In fact, when you look at it this way, you can tell that I've got a little more space here than I do here. But that's all right. I actually care more that the distance between the top and the bottom is more even. But if I had it to do again, it would shift that way. So all the more reason to use glue, like I said. Okay, now we are ready for our pocket pages. So we've got our pocket pages pre-prepared. So we're going to slip these pocket pages directly over each one of the hinges. And remove, I'm just dry fitting right now. Remove the adhesive and put these down permanently. So I'm actually going to put one of these down, and then I'm going to do the rest offline. So we can get started. I'm going to go ahead and pull up the adhesive. Side to side. Actually, I didn't want to take it all the way off. I want to expose really just a tip for now until I get this over. Make sure everything's going to fit.